Welcome to the TREPX podcast. TREP is short for entrepreneur. One of the most meaningful and rewarding, yet difficult challenges you can take on. The TREPX podcast gives you actionable insights, real examples, and success X factors from experienced entrepreneurs as we are learning, living, and sharing in the exciting endeavor of entrepreneurship. Now here's your fellow entrepreneurial traveler and host, Mickey Deming.
Hello, welcome to the TREPX podcast. This is Mickey Deming. Today we have another interview to share, and we did something a little bit unique, and it was a lot of fun. So let me set the stage for you on what you're going to hear in this interview. Today I had a chance to interview Michael Port, who has a new book out, Steal the Show, and it is a phenomenal book. He's an expert on performing, giving speeches, and all the things that go into that: anxiety, fear, preparation, criticism, feedback, how to deal with those things so that you come out to communicate clearly and passionately and to get an idea across that is meaningful to you. And that is something that can apply not just to giving a speech on a stage, but in everything, in conversations you have, in uncomfortable situations, in a meeting, all things across the board. And so with Michael coming on the show, it just so happened that he was coming on at a time where Michael Luchies, a guy who works here with us on the marketing side at TREPX, is about to do a TEDx talk. And so he was dealing with his speech and preparing and getting feedback. And then I was having this Michael Port interview, and I said, hey, I have an idea. How about Michael Luchies, you come on this interview with me, and we'll ask both of you questions. So Michael Port was a great sport about it. And so this interview is pretty interesting because we get some real practical advice from Michael Port to Michael Luchies to help him for his talk, which at the time of this airing, he will have given it. So definitely listen to this and hear all the things that he's working through and all the great advice that Michael Port provides. It's stuff that you can use in all aspects of your life, even if you're not about to give a speech. But if you are, then it's going to be even more powerful. So we will update you on how Michael Luchies' speech goes. He had a lot of fun just getting this advice. It was a cool, unique format, and it worked out really well. And we appreciate Michael Port being such a good sport in how we put it together. So definitely check out Michael. He is totally an expert in communicating and can help you in so many ways. His website is just at michaelport.com, and you can get his book, Steal the Show, at any bookstore or Amazon. Just search for Steal the Show, Michael Port. So please enjoy and check out this interview at trepxgroup.com, and that's where we'll also update with the results of Michael's speech. So enjoy this interview with Michael Luchies and Michael Port. Hello, Michael. Welcome to the TREPX podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for being here. I've also got Michael Luchies here with me.
Hey, Michael Luchies.
Thanks for having me here. Yeah, and so we're going to have some fun. Michael Luchies doing a TEDx talk in 2 days, and we are talking to the Steal the Show master himself, so this is going to be fun. Speaking of that, your book, Steal the Show, has been doing really well, and so I want to ask you about that. What led you to writing this book? Like, what was the message you were hoping to communicate when you decided to put this together?
That performance is part of everyday life. It's not just about public speaking. And that good performance is not about fake or phony behavior. It's not manufactured behavior. Good performance is authentic behavior in a manufactured environment. So this TEDx talk that Michael Luchies is doing is a manufactured environment. You have I assume you will, have a big round red dot to stand on. And there's people sitting in a theater, and then you have light on you and they don't have light on you. It's manufactured, so you've got to come out there and be as authentic as possible. But the same thing is true for job interviews, for negotiations, sales meetings, even meeting your in-laws or your future in-laws for the first time is a type of performance. It's a manufactured environment. I mean, take the job interview. You have a couple of people sitting on one side of the table, and you're sitting on the other side of the table, and they have orchestrated this meeting so that you answer questions they want you to answer, and then your job is to demonstrate that they should hire you and get them to say yes. It's all manufactured. But authenticity is often what wins the day in those types of situations.
So how do you find that perfect mix between, being authentic and kind of rolling off the cuff to preparing ahead of time and having some responses, or for me, having, a lot of that already prepared to talk about?
Yeah, so surprisingly, the better prepared you are, the more authentic you seem. Sometimes people push back against our suggestion for more rehearsal. In Steal the Show, I dedicate an entire big chapter to the rehearsal process because most people don't know how to rehearse. They wouldn't. It's not something you're taught in school unless you train as a performer. So they push back against rehearsal because they say they've tried it. They say, I've done some rehearsal and it made me really stiff. So I just like to wing it. I just want to go up there and be myself, as if rehearsal suggests that you're not yourself when you're performing. And they're 100% right in that they were stiff because they rehearsed. But it's because they were only rehearsed a little bit. What happens when you only rehearse a little bit and you know your material a little bit, you are then thinking about what you did in rehearsal while you're performing. You're trying to recall what you worked on to deliver it in performance. But if you are so well prepared that you don't have to work to recall it, that it is now ingrained in you, it is programmed into you, then you can let it go. You can let it come to you in the moment. And as a result, they see you thinking, they see your thought process, but it's quick and it's directed and it's well organized. And they can follow you. Your job is to help them consume what you have to offer, not just hear it.
That totally makes sense. I think, there's the phrase, discipline equals freedom. Like the more you have that discipline and tightened up, the more you have that ability to be free and to, feel comfortable and not manufactured.
Well, that's exactly right. And oftentimes it's the people who see themselves as natural communicators who do the least amount of rehearsal. And they wing it because, they're quick, they're witty, they can get people to laugh. And I think I hear Michael Lukey laughing there at that one, thinking, oh, wait, that's me. I don't know, Michael. I haven't met him yet, so we'll see if that's the case. But often they say, no, I'm just going to go up there and wing it. And because they teach that particular topic, they feel that it'll work well in a speech. But just because you teach something or just because you have or lived through an experience, it doesn't mean it's ready for presentation to an audience. And the surprising thing is that when you are well prepared and you improv, you seem the most spontaneous. It seems like it's actually coming to you in the moment, and that's what surprises most performers.
That's really interesting, and I can totally see that. And I know Michael has done a lot of preparing, so we'll get into some more of the specifics in a minute. But I want to ask this right up front, because my guess would be, now that you've put this out there, I just want to hear from you, like, what percentage of the questions that you get related to this topic center around the topic of fear and anxiety?
A large percentage, a very large percentage. And
that's kind of what I figured.
And I really understand it. Look, I get nervous before I give speeches. I get nervous before podcasts. I'm often nervous because I care about serving my audience.
That's a good point.
Well, the thing we have to remember is that it's never about us. It's always about the people that we serve. And one of the things that makes us more anxious is obsessing on ourselves. One of my clients called me up very anxious because she got a big interview on a morning TV show. She said, Michael, what should I do? I really want to be good. And I said, you cannot be good. And she said, what do you mean? I said, no, it's not that you're not good. It's just you can't go into an interview like that and try to be good. You can go in there and try to be helpful. And that's very different in terms of the way that you look at your work. It no longer is about you doing something good. It's about you helping others. And then, of course, if you are helpful, you're perceived as good. So you're going for that result rather than something that is narcissistic or self-centered in nature. And then if you make flubs and, you know what I mean? Even if you have a wardrobe malfunction, it's just not a big deal to you, because that's not what people are judging you on generally. They're judging you on your ability to deliver on a promise. Is what you are offering relevant to them? That's part of it. Now, look, I'm sure you heard the expression, or not the expression, but the saying that people are more afraid of public speaking than death. You know, that public speaking is the number one fear and death is the number two fear. Jerry Seinfeld has a great joke. He says, if that's true, that means that if you're at a funeral, you'd rather be in the box than giving the eulogy. I really get that we get anxious, but I do not buy for 1 second that people are more afraid of public speaking than dying. Because let's just say, Mickey, that you were terrified of public speaking. And I'm going to be very intense here. This is going to be dramatic. You ready?
Good. We like that. We need that.
Let's just say you're terrified of public speaking, but you don't want to do it. And I said, will you please do it? And you go, no, I'm not doing it. I'm more afraid of it than dying. I said, okay, great. Let me go get my gun. So I take my gun and I point it at your head. I don't have a gun, by the way, but let's say I did. I point it at your head and I say, okay, so either you're going to give a speech right now, or I'm going to pull the trigger and I'm going to shoot you in the head. Which option are you going to take, Mickey?
I would speak. I would go ahead and
speak. I think most people would speak. And so that's why, you know how 67% of statistics are made up on the spot? You know, that people just make up studies. Like, I don't know where this study came from that said public speaking is the number one fear. You can massage surveys to give you whatever answer you want. But I think it just perpetuates this myth that it's supposed to be this horrible, scary thing. But realize all we're doing is just connecting with an audience. That's our job. That's all we're doing.
Yeah, I think when you reframe it that way, it really, really helps. And I want to flip it back to Michael Luchies now, because he's been going through this process, and I know anxiety has been a part of that. How have you worked through it, and how has that been kind of on your mind?
Yeah, so I was just wondering if I could hire Michael Port to sit backstage with a gun in case I get cold feet on Saturday morning. But so it's been really tough. I mean, one of the questions I had for you is, how can you deal with that anxiety? I mean, if it's only natural, if that's part of caring about the speech you're giving, where is the balance, or how do you help manage that to keep it manageable?
Well, I think there's a couple things we can consider. And the first part of Steal the Show, I focus on the performer's mindset. And I think the performer's mindset helps reduce I would say you might still have anxiety, but it will not stop you from doing great work. And that's what's important, because just because you have the fear doesn't mean that you're not going to go out there and kill it. And the job is not necessarily to just reduce all fear and to be, unfeeling, so that we have no worry whatsoever. That's okay. I have no problem with that. The question is, can we perform through that? And that's what the performer is able to do. And so the reason we're afraid of speaking is probably because we're afraid of criticism. Otherwise, I'm not sure what we're afraid of, because we know that we're not going to die on stage unless somebody shoots us. We're not going to die. We might get nervous and get some hives, get red. Our fingers may shake, something like that. But we're not going to die. So that's only a little bit of nervous. But why would we be nervous if somebody saw us get hives or have our handshake? Well, because we don't want them to think that we are bad or stupid or not up to the task or weak. It's fear of criticism. And trust me, I do not want to be criticized. I am not going out there in the world trying to be criticized. But it will come with doing anything in the world in a big way. So there are two types of critics. There are internal critics and external critics. There's the critic in the cheap seats, the critic who likes to push people down to lift themselves up. And often they hurt. They feel really, you hear them loudly. They feel important. They have a lot of impact, unfortunately. And then there's the internal critic. And the internal critic are the voices of judgment in your head, the ones that say you're not enough, you don't know enough, you'll never be enough. And those are often the first line of attack. Those are the things that slow you down the most initially, because the louder your voices of judgment are, the more you hear those critics in the cheap seats. And if you are able to quiet down, maybe even to silence some of those voices of judgment in your head, then you don't really hear the critics in the cheap seats as much. You know they're there. You know they say things. Like I had a woman review one of my books once, and the whole thing was about how she wanted to slap me. Like, I mean, that's what she wanted to do. She's like, I just want to slap Michael Port. I just want to slap him in the face. You know, I was like, I don't know what I did. It was so terrible. I mean, you know, I just wrote a book, for God's sakes. So, you know, I don't really hear that as a problem. I don't worry about that because I don't think I want to slap myself in the face. But if I don't trust myself, if I haven't done the work to prepare, if I haven't given everything that I have, then those voices are louder. Because the thing is, if you know that you didn't give your best, if you know that you didn't go out there and express yourself fully, if you held back in some way, or you didn't put in the time, then those critics are really gonna mess with you because you know you didn't give your best, and then you see, well, maybe I am unworthy. So what can we do, each one of us individually, to start to silence some of those critics? We can ask ourselves, what's more important to us, approval or results? And most people will have a knee-jerk reaction to that question. They'll say, of course, well, it's results. I mean, I'm not going for approval, you know. And I often suggest people reconsider and ask themselves again and reflect on this for a while, because if you look at a lot of the actions you take, and I put myself right, you know, in the line of fire on this one, you know, a lot of the things we do because we want somebody to say we're great, or to like us, or, you know, give us a pat on the back and say, oh my God, you're the best in the room. Oh my God, you're so smart. Wow, you look great. You know, we're looking for approval. I mean, I didn't become an actor 25 years ago because I didn't want approval. I mean, most people who want to perform want some kind of approval for their ideas and their work. But we need to move away from a compulsive desire to get people to approve of us, because that's when we have the voices of judgment, but that's when they're so loud, and toward results. And so we ask ourselves, what's the result we're going for? It's not a standing ovation. It's the delivery of a promise, because your speech has 5 components that are essential. Number 1, a big idea. Now, the big idea doesn't need to be different to make a difference. This is critical. It doesn't need to be different to make a difference. You take Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. His big idea was that all men and women are created equal. That wasn't different. There's somewhere else that was written. Do either of you guys know where that was written? It's this document that we have in the U.S. called the Constitution. It was not a new idea.
Right.
Okay, but it wasn't realized in the world, so it was big. So that's number 1, a big idea. And then a promise. A promise that you deliver to the audience, the thing that they want to take away. And your job is to deliver on that promise. That's number 2. Number 3 is a demonstration that you know the way the world looks to them. You get it. Because otherwise they can easily dismiss you as, oh, well, he doesn't get me, or she doesn't get me. That's why when you ask about fear, of course I recognize right away that most of us are afraid, that I'm afraid too. Or we're talking about rehearsal, and I say, yes, of course, you're right if you felt stiff because you did a little bit of rehearsal. That's right. You're not wrong. You're absolutely right. I get that. So we need to make sure that we can demonstrate, because sometimes our big idea is confronting. And if our big idea is confronting, meaning we're asking people to think differently, to feel differently, to see the world differently, to do something differently, and they don't really know us that well. And, you know, if it's a TEDx talk and you've got 18 minutes to do it, that's a really big ask. And if there's any reason that they can get out of adopting this new big idea because it's confronting, even if they're kind of interested, they may opt out. It doesn't get me. And then it's easy for them to dismiss it or to ignore it. So that's the 3rd piece. The 4th is making sure that we can demonstrate the consequences of not adopting the big idea. You know, what is going to happen if you don't adopt this big idea? And 5, what are the rewards of adopting this big idea? if I deliver on this promise as a speaker and you are able to take this thing away and go do this thing in the world differently or feel differently, what are the rewards of that? So those 5 components should be in place in any great presentation.
Michael Luchies rewriting his speech right now, so let me give him a minute.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I like that. I think those, just to recap, the 5: big idea, promise, demonstration, consequences, and reward. I think that's can apply to anything, and that's a valuable way to communicate. And one thing I really want to go back to that I think was so important, just related to, because the fear and anxiety is something that, sometimes you can make that mental understanding of it, but then it still kind of can cripple you. And the way you put it, of like where stress or anxiety or criticism are things that are going to happen. Like if you're doing something meaningful, like that's going to happen. Like it's not, you can't get away from it, and to almost embrace that and like say, okay, this is a good thing that I'm dealing with it. But I want to take that and then go back to where we were at the beginning, where you're talking about when you're in that moment in your manufactured situation, to find authenticity. Because I think that's the scariest part, is like that I'm being exposed, like my whole self is exposed. What are some and the way you put it was really good, of like your own internal criticism is really the enemy. Yeah. How do you manage that whenever you are trying to be authentic and vulnerable out and putting yourself out there?
So what are we scared of? We addressed that initially. We are scared of being rejected, of people telling us that we don't know what we're doing or we're not worthy. And I just wonder. I really do. I wonder if our fear is stronger than our desire. If we're immobilized by those thoughts. Because if our desire is stronger than our fear, the desire will usually win out. Mm-hmm. And that's another question that I often ask. How important is it to do this thing? Is it an idea like, I like the idea of becoming well known on this particular topic, or I like the idea of talking about this, but more because I see that it's kind of cool, rather than I have such a deep desire to go out and speak on this, to change the world in some way as a result, that the fear that I have, it doesn't match up to that. And so then if the fear is greater than your desire, I would say, well, maybe that's not the thing that you should be speaking on or really want to do.
Yeah, it goes back to what you were saying before, of like when the focus is all on you, that's going to multiply the anxiety. So with Michael Luchies and his narcissism, that's really our goal right now, is to work through that.
Well, it's interesting. I did an interview with a podcaster recently who said he started reading the book on the airplane on the way to give a speech. He was a professional. And he said, after 2 chapters, I had to stop reading. Couldn't read anymore. I said, why? You didn't like the book? He goes, no, because I started to rewrite my whole speech. And he was smart enough to know that you do not read Steal the Show the night before you're to give a speech. Because you're going to read it and go, oh my God, I have to change everything, or all these habits that I have, I got to get rid of them. You do not want to do that. So I'm just saying, Michael, don't read the book literally the day or 2 before, because if you've been preparing for something, we don't want to make a lot of last-minute changes.
Right.
That can be a little dangerous, because then we're trying to pull at things that we're not ready to perform. So I'd rather see someone perform something that they've spent a good amount of time preparing for and are ready to perform that, even if I know it can be much, much better, than trying to break it all apart and redo it at the last minute. Now, if you're, if you're a professional, you've been doing this your whole life, you have more experience and can sometimes pull that off. So, for example, my Think Big Revolution keynote, you can see an excerpt of that on YouTube. You just put in Think Big Revolution. It's a 16-minute trailer that you can see there. That's a speech that I rewrote 2 weeks before I was to give it for the first time. I'd been working on it for 4 or 5 months, and I did an open rehearsal, and I realized it was just not working. And it wasn't the performance aspect, it was the content, and the way that I was introducing the content was not working. And I knew I had 2 weeks. I did an 80% rewrite in 1 week, and then another week to memorize all the material, and then I pulled it off. But I've been doing it for a long time. So, what I should be doing, meaning I just have more experience with it, so I can pull that off. But I wouldn't recommend most people do that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. That's something we actually had a conversation about because with Michael, and I know when was it you decided I'm not changing it anymore?
Well, I had decided that last Friday night, but I've still made changes, and I scrapped everything about 2.5 weeks ago, although I had been working on it for about 6-7 months, and so everything has changed since then, and I've still been making changes, so I've really been struggling with that.
But it's actually, the thing is, it's a great thing. It's really great that we can address that now that you brought that up, because rehearsal is a messy process. Rehearsal is a process of creation and destruction, and recreation and destruction, and recreation and destruction. And every choice that you make takes you to another choice, a better choice, and then that takes you to a better choice. So when I'm working with a student, I might give them direction, and they may do exactly what I asked, and we discover, you know what, that's not the thing we should keep. It's not right. But it takes us to another choice. And that's the creative process. People who haven't had a lot of experience in this type of creative process are often concerned by the ugliness of rehearsal. They're upset if what they're doing isn't working perfectly. But we don't expect it to as performers. That's why, when you do a Broadway play, you rehearse for 8 weeks before you put it up, but you put it up in Boston for 6 months before you bring it to Broadway. So you can work and rework and rework and rework, and it is an iterative and a very generative process. So when you're okay with that, I don't mind, sitting and writing for a day on a speech and then working on it for a week and going, that's not working, let me rewrite, and keep going. I have no problem with that because I know that that's the process. But folks who haven't had a lot of experience often get upset. They go, I wasted all this time, I don't understand, it's not working, it's just not where you want it to be yet. That's different than criticizing yourself for it absolutely not working as if that's a major problem. So when I realized the presentation wasn't working, the Think Big Revolution wasn't working 2 weeks before, I was a little bit nervous about the amount of changes, the amount of work I needed to do before it, but it didn't stop me. There does get to be a point where you do say, that's enough, no more changes, everything is as is. And for me, that was a shorter time period on that particular speech than I might normally want to have. But yeah, it's just a messy process. And the fact that you've been working on it for 6 months and writing and rewriting and creating and changing, that's great. As long as it doesn't become compulsive because one is a perfectionist and thinks that it's going to be perfect, because it never will be perfect. It's an art. And it really doesn't matter what you do in rehearsal. It matters what you do on the day, on the stage. So you can have, you go, oh my God, I'm brilliant in rehearsal, and then you go out on stage and you spend half the time thinking about how your pants look, and you don't deliver on the moment. But you go, but I was really good. I was really good in rehearsal. It doesn't matter. It's what you do in the moment on the day.
And so one thing you briefly talked about is how you give advice and then the person deciding if that's what to go with or not. I've asked a lot of different people for advice, sent them audio, me speaking, and in some cases I've gotten the exact opposite, back to back, saying the first half was really strong, no, the first half was bad, but the second half was so powerful, you should do this and this and this. Where do you come in? What are your thoughts on what, how do I know what to accept and what not to accept? Where's that balance?
Well, it's the source, isn't it? So if my 10-year-old gives me advice on investing in the stock market, I'm going to, take that with a grain of salt. But if I sat down with Warren Buffett and he gave me some advice, I would take that much more seriously. So it, in large part, depends on the source. Because it's art, just like movies, plays, TV, music, etc., we know what we like and what we don't like. But we don't often know why. Mm-hmm. And we don't often know how to change it, or certainly how to tell somebody else to change it. So what they say they don't like may actually be a result of something else in the presentation that could use improvement, but it just has an unintended consequence. So can you give me an example, Michael, of something that somebody said they wanted to see changed, that they didn't like?
So I initially had some calls to action at the end of the speech, and I was told by a couple people that I needed to erase those, that I shouldn't have these specific calls to action, and other people thought they should stay.
And why did the people think that they should go? Like the people who are in the camp of they should go, why'd they think that? And the people who are in the camp of they should stay, why'd they think that?
Sure. So the people that thought they should go thought it sounded too much like a lecture, and they also said, well, all the TEDx speeches I've ever seen don't have these specific calls to action. The people that thought they should stay thought it was impactful. It could be impactful to the audience and give them something to do after my speech was over.
Great. So let me say those again, because I want to write them down and address each one specifically. So the first one was what?
Was that they thought I shouldn't have the calls to action because it sounded like a lecture.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I can't even remember what I said the second part was.
Stay, because then it gives them something practical to do.
Well, there was a second that was a negative.
Well, that's the positive.
Yeah, there was a second one that was a negative. And
that the other TEDx talks they have seen before don't have these call to actions.
Yeah,
like
okay,
that.
and others don't have it. Okay, let me write that down. And then the third, the ones who liked it, they thought it gave the audience something to do.
Correct.
Okay, great. So, now, let's address the second one first, that others haven't done it. Okay, that is definitely not a reason not to do something.
Right.
There's also because other people have is definitely not a reason to do something. To me, well, let me give you Frank Zappa, and then I'll give you me first. So Frank Zappa said art is creating something out of nothing and selling it, which I think is great. I think that's quite clever. What you're doing here, since it is an artistic expression of what you believe and what you stand for, your ideas, your job in part is to break the rules. Not just to break the rules, not just to be controversial or to make waves, but to try to create something that is an experience for the audience that they haven't had before, to get them to think differently, to feel differently, or to act differently. And so if they say, well, nobody does calls to action, you shouldn't do it, that's not a good enough reason for me. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, you said because it sounded like a lecture. So this is one of those pieces of advice that I mentioned earlier where they may be misdescribing what's not working for them. So if they said it sounds like a lecture because of the calls to action at the end, the question I would ask myself is, well, is it because of the calls to action at the end or because of some way that I'm delivering throughout? Because just the calls to action at the end seem very small compared to the overall speech, and to say that it's a lecture because of a call to action at the end seems maybe a little bit incongruent to me. So I'm not sure that the advice really tells us what they are seeing. So that's why being able to sift through and filter through advice is so incredibly important. I addressed this in one of the chapters in Steal the Show about how to sift through this kind of advice and how to ask them specifically to give you the advice that you want. So instead of saying, can you give me advice, tell me what you think, we give them very specific direction. So, was I physically engaging? Did you feel that I was connected to you physically, relaxed physically, etc.? And then they can say yes or no. Do you feel that this was an experience rather than a lecture like a teacher would give in school? Does it feel more moving than that? Now that helps you. Then you can get a sense of whether or not they felt it was an experience or whether it was a lecture. That would the calls to action, do these calls to action at the end make you want to do something? Does it move the conversation forward? Does it move the action forward? And if the answer is yes, then you know you're on track. If your answer is no, then you have to figure out, well, why aren't those calls to action moving them? Is it something earlier in the speech, or is it the calls to action specifically? And then people who liked it said that they liked it because it gave them something to do. So without actually seeing you do it, I can't tell you if it's working or not. But it is part of our job is to sift through. So I'm very selective about who I take advice from. So when somebody comes up to me just randomly, and I don't know who they are, and I'm working on something, and they saw me work on it. Let's just say I don't know. Let's say somebody saw a video that I put up online that was a test of some new thing I was working on, a performance element, and I said I'm just going to put this out and let's just see how it goes. But I want to make my own interpretation based on something else, like how many shares it gets or some other analytical metric. And someone comes up and says, listen, can I give you some constructive criticism? And I don't want it. I can say, no, thank you. There's nothing wrong with saying no, thank you. Because not everybody has the right to give you their constructive criticism. To me, constructive criticism is just criticism dressed up with makeup. Constructive is the makeup. Feedback, support is different than constructive criticism. Usually when someone starts with constructive criticism, it gives you that little pit in your stomach, like, okay, you know what I'm talking about. So, I'm not interested in that person. I'm interested in the person like, I saw something here that was really interesting to me. I saw that you were doing this, and I think I understand why you're doing it, and I have an idea of how you can even go farther with that. That's the kind of feedback that I want. And that's the kind of person that I will take feedback from. And then I'll decide whether or not I want to implement that. So it's, again, part of it is how the person approaches me. And, of course, a great teacher will approach you in a way that is accessible, that opens you up rather than closes you down. And if somebody comes with the criticism first, I generally am just not that interested. It doesn't mean that they're wrong, but I don't necessarily want to engage with them because I don't want to be in a critical, nasty conversation about, the fact that they want to slap me in the face. You see?
I love it.
Yeah.
I think the cool thing about this, like, everything you're saying is so applicable, even if you're not about to go on stage and give a speech. Like, it all applies. Like, how do you filter through criticism? How do you know who to listen to? How do you deal with these, criticisms and fears and all those things? I think it covers such a wide spectrum of, as you say, performing.
Yeah, so for example, in our Heroic Public Speaking graduate program, we take students through a 4-month conservatory-like program where they come meet with us for 4 days each month for 4 months to work on their speeches. And by the end, their speech is ready for prime time. But you need that kind of time, just like you worked on yours for 6 months. You need that kind of time. You're not going to put together a brilliant speech for a TED Talk in an hour and a half. Most likely. A few people could pull it off, but if they have, it's because they've been speaking on that material for 30 years, and they're just reorganizing it for 18 minutes rather than coming up with something completely new. And within a month or two into the training program with them, they're able to have rehearsals without us. Because, we're still there with them, coaching them, but they also do rehearsal without us because they now have a language that they can speak with each other. They know how to give feedback. They know how to ask for feedback. They know how to accept the feedback and decide whether or not they're going to use it. They know how to implement the feedback. But when they go in there, they wouldn't know that. So part of the training is to learn how to do that, and then you do that with people that speak the same language, that have the same vocabulary. And that makes a big difference.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I kind of want to put you both on the spot now as we kind of wrap this thing up. So for me, I can speak from in a true way that I've seen Michael. He's prepared for this. He's ready. I've heard the audio, and it's great. It's great content. He's going to do really, really well. He's put in the time. So he's 48 hours from the stage, and so I want to go to Michael Port now for pep talk time. What can you say to Michael to make sure that he's ready to go, feeling good, and ready to steal the show in a couple days?
So you're not going to make any more changes, and you know your material. And when you go to perform, actually, let me go back. Before you perform, you're going to do some more run-throughs over the next 48 hours, but you're not going to kill yourself. You're not going to run this 30 times a day for the next 2 days. You're going to do it a few times, maybe once or twice in the morning because it's a short speech, it's not 60 minutes, and maybe once or twice in the afternoon today, and the same thing tomorrow. On the day, you do really what is a dry run. That's what we call it. You do a dry run where you just go through it at 50%. You just go through the blocking. That's your movement on stage, if you have movement on stage. You go through the language. Any exercises, interaction you do, you just go through it. But you go through it at, real pace, real time, but not pushing. What happens sometimes when we get, and then, that's before, on the morning of the speech. And then you give the speech, because what happens sometimes is we burn ourselves out with all the energy of performing, rehearsing, all the energy of worrying about it, going into the performance. And then by the time we give the performance, we're exhausted. We're just a mess. So what happens then is we try to push. We try to create a particular energy. We try to manufacture emotions or experiences, or we do the work for the audience. And our job is not to do the work for them. Our job is to bring them along on a journey. And those are two very different things. So when it's time to go, just clear your mind of all the things that you've been planning and questions about whether it's right or wrong, and stay in the moment. Don't anticipate what's going to happen next. Allow yourself to stay in the moment, and then allow your material to come to you organically in that moment, so you are connected for real, in real time, with real people. And if you drop a line, if you do something a little bit different than you planned or out of order, don't sweat it. Don't worry about it. The audience will never know. Don't apologize. Don't go back and go, no, that's not what I planned. I gotta do it again. Of course, you won't do that. But sometimes we have this, we're upset because we did it wrong. We missed something, and we get upset about it when we're performing, but the audience has no idea. And when we get upset about it, then it affects our performance. So none of that matters. What matters is your connection in the moment, and you don't need to push through it. You don't need to force anything. Just allow it to be organic and real. Do not drink the night before, and do not load up on coffee the day of, or have a huge meal the morning of or at lunch beforehand, and try to stay away from taking anything or eating sugar, things like that, that would spike your blood sugar levels up and down, so you're as relaxed as you can. And then finally, if you know how to do any kind of breathing exercises, they certainly help. One of the things that I think is that anxiety is often excitement without the breath. When you are excited and you don't breathe fully, you often get anxious. And the more anxious you get, the more shallow your breathing gets. And our breath is really our power. That's our force on stage. And so if we are breathing fully, then we have a lot of power. We're more grounded. We have more gravitas. If we are breathing shallowly, then we often seem light, and our energy goes up rather than down, which is a very different type of energy, and the audience feels it. And we're always moving down and towards them, down and towards them, down and towards them, never up and away from them, never up and away from them. Those are two very different things. So when we train people for a long period of time, we also work on breathing, because it makes a big difference also in the sound of your voice.
That's great. Michael, how are you feeling?
Good. I'm feeling good. I really love what you're saying about desire over fear as well. I think that's given me a lot of confidence, because although I have such a great desire to give this talk, it's so easy to let fear succumb everything and let it take over. So I think that has really helped me focus on the power I think this has, the desire I have to try to help others, and that will help me battle that fear back.
Good. Fantastic. I would love to know how it goes. If you could just shoot me an email, let me know how it goes afterwards. Yeah. I'd love to see a video of it, once they have it. I'd just be really excited. And I wish you the best of luck. Go break a leg.
Thank you. It's been very
Thanks so much,
Okay.
Michael, for being a part of this. And let us know, for the audience, where can we find out more, where we can get the book and all the great info?
Sure. So if you want to pick up a copy of Steal the Show, you can do it anywhere books are sold. There's a web page at stealtheshow.com, that gives away a lot of bonuses for buyers of the book, things that are very helpful, templates, video documentaries on speaking technique and coaching sessions, and more. If you want to learn about the events that we do around the country and around the world, go to heroicpublicspeaking.com, heroicpublicspeaking.com. And if you ever need me, just shoot me an email at questions@michaelport.com, questions@michaelport.com, and I'll get back to you.
Perfect. Michael, thank you so much for being part of this. Michael Luchies, thank you, too, for being put on the spot. This was a lot of fun.
thank you.
We'll definitely check out all your stuff and let everybody know how the speech went.
Fantastic. This is one of my favorite interviews that I've done in a long time, so thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the TREPX podcast. For more episodes, interviews, and business growth tools, please visit TREPXgroup.com.